As I was saying, Dr. Mara Hine, hopefully I pronounce it okay.
Heine.
It's
Heine.
Oh, Heine, okay. An adjunct professor of research integrity at the University College of Dublin Institute for Discovery. And today we will talk about academic freedom. And from the discussion that we have with the professor, we decided that today she will bring the topic of academic freedom under pressure, politics, funding, and individual responsibilities. I see among the participants that we have also participants from our consortium, so the parties and implementers within CATALISI, and I'm sure that everyone will benefit from this presentation. Laura, maybe we can start with just a brief presentation of yourself and the project, and then we will continue with the presentation of the professor. Thank you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thanks to Professor Heine for joining us and for this webinar. I'm Laura Mentini from APRE, the Italian agency for the promotion of European research, and we are coordinating this CATALISI project. I will give you just a short presentation of the project to contextualize this webinar. Let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so CATALISI is a Horizon Europe funded project coordinated by us. And the rationale behind the project is that higher education institutions are becoming and are always more drivers of change in alignment with what is the European research area's objectives, but also the higher education transformation agenda at the EU level. So for this reason, the European Commission is pushing and supporting actions to develop strategies, new tools, new services that can help and draw these universities in developing and co-designing roadmaps for institutional changes that contribute overall to a new governance that responds to societal missions and societal challenges. So our aim is to help and support universities across Europe to successfully implement an individual strategy and pathway for institutional transformation. How do we do this? Through the adoption of 7 innovative acceleration services. These services are intended to design and facilitate acceleration institutional change within the fields of research and innovation area. And the ultimate aim is to strengthen collaborations across regions in order to maximize the value of research and its impact, and also to govern the transformation that affect science and society nowadays, but also to produce and disseminate new high-quality knowledge. Our consortium is composed of 11 partners across 8 different EU countries. 3 of them are widening countries, Poland, Greece, and Lithuania. And we've also have a methodology which is built upon 2 different blocks. On the one hand, 7 implementers. These are the higher education institutions that are intended to implement new reforms in their structures, and also 4 facilitators who are supporting universities with new knowledge and acceleration services. And also we have different phases in our project. So in the first months of the project, we went into the exploration of what are the needs of each implementer. Also, we co-designed together with them and the stakeholders transformational pathways, designing and defining action plans, objectives, but also indicators of evaluation. And in the last part of the project, in the second years, let's say, universities started to implement such actions within their context through the adoption of acceleration services. And finally, an assessment and a monitoring system has been developed, also drawing policy recommendations at national and EU level. So these are the different domains, so the content of transformation, which are deemed necessary for each university. We have different areas of intervention within the research and innovation field. These span from talent circulation to open science, to the reform of research assessment, sustainability and funding, and so on. And each area is selected by universities according to their needs and context. And these are the different acceleration services that we use in CATALISI. There are 7 of them. And today, the webinar that we are conducting is specifically conducted within the acceleration service of strengthening the skills, the capacity of universities to transform their ecosystems. So within this acceleration service, we have developed a learning hub where we have co-created and developed and implemented training paths to provide universities with the necessary knowledge and tools that are required within their, let's say, within their context. So the ultimate goal of this service is to provide, as I was saying, skill set, but also to connect different universities with other actors in order to share knowledge, good practices, and expertise. This is the list of webinars that we have conducted until now. You can find all of them in our website. And today we have the pleasure of hearing more about academic freedom under pressure. And finally, if you go on our website, there are different stories of transformation from all universities to take inspiration and to stay in contact with all of our results and good practices. And finally, we have also developed a community of practice. So to stay engaged within the topic, to continue exchanging good practices, expertise, there is a community of practice, and you can still subscribe within our website. It is composed of different people who have expertise, but also interest with regards of institutional transformation in universities in order to develop joint activities, discussion, but also share experience and build collective knowledge overall on the topic. And this is it from my side. Here are the contacts to stay in touch, and I hope you have a nice webinar today.
Thank you very much, Laura, for your presentation and the presentation of what is CATALISI in overall, and also within which acceleration services we are creating these webinars. Okay, Professor Heine, if you want to share your presentation, and you can start.
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak to you today. I'm not an expert on academic freedom, but I suppose in thinking about research integrity and good research practice and so on, over the last couple of years, academic freedom is something that is being more often spoken about, which is interesting because I think that a lot has changed in the academic environment, and certainly people feel that the freedom of their activities is under pressure, and there are lots of reasons for that. So I'll cover a few of those reasons this morning with you. So just to very quickly say what it is, I picked out two definitions that I quite like. The freedom to express ideas without risk of official interference or professional disadvantage. And I think the second one of those is important because people can often be sanctioned by having their careers suppressed, which is it's a little bit more nuanced than somebody just simply being fired or having political pressure put on them. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're getting along. And then this would be an older, I suppose, definition of academic freedom: the freedom of teachers and students to teach and study and pursue knowledge and research without unreasonable interference or restrictions from laws, institutional regulations, or public pressures. And I've also highlighted unreasonable there. So it is not that people are completely free. The academic freedom is not unlimited. So what it definitely is not, it's not a free-for-all path to abuse the research system or colleagues, research participants, society, ecosystems, and that little e-cog there at the end is the European Code of Conduct. So I've picked that out as one of the principles in the European Code of Conduct of respect. So you cannot just simply start to disrespect the system. It's also not a pass for being dishonest and not being open about or accountable for your research. from start to finish. It's not a path for unreliable research either, of poor design, methodology, or analysis, or interpretation. But the idea of academic freedom is not a new one. This goes back to literally to Greek times, where there was a conflict between orthodoxy and a move by Galileo and others towards a more rational understanding of natural phenomena, such as the sun was not an entity but a ball of fire, or that the earth was in fact not flat, etc. So there's always been that kind of conflict between current beliefs and new beliefs that have, I suppose, well, some people lost their lives, unfortunately, back in the day about that. There's also been quite a strong religious interference, especially during medieval and Renaissance times, where the church essentially censored universities and individual scholars because they did not like what they were saying. But kind of in the 18th and 19th centuries, then, with the emergence of nation states, governments became more of a threat to the autonomy of universities. And so that has set a scene of continuing tensions, which actually we're still seeing today. But there are some really beacons within that. Some universities like Leiden, Göttingen, the Humboldt, Berlin, they really became models for other universities of how to apply basic principles of academic freedom to their researchers. In the 20th and 21st centuries, unfortunately, we've seen the rise of both the left and the right, but extremist regimes so it doesn't matter which side they're on. They have been curtailing academic freedom. I mean, it's going on at the moment, unfortunately. And so in the 21st century, there's been a lot of kind of important international statements developed around academic freedom. So the United Nations Statement of 1976, UNESCO in 1997, and more recently Bonn in 2020, who are trying to reaffirm the basic principles of academic freedom. And unfortunately now we're also in the post-truth era, where social media can be used to attack people, where there is a kind of a little bit of a rash of political correctness, where misinformation, disinformation, etc., are really damaging the value of evidence knowledge. So in some ways, I'm not sure where we go from there. But anyway, so within all of that, there are some really strong pressures on academic freedom. And the ones that I've chosen are from the Academic Freedom Monitor for 2024 for Europe. So political interference, there are at least 5 countries in Europe that would be known to interfere politically with the research going on in the country. Then there are also civil society attacks on academics, usually via social media. That's quite a new thing, really. And it's a very distressing thing for academics who maybe hold a slightly contrary view or have found evidence that, again, goes against the orthodoxy. And sometimes there's the inappropriate or the stealth use of policies to punish those people. So it could be HR policies, or it could be university bringing in a policy that they know will disadvantage certain people within the university. And also there is a very strong private sector influence on the kind of research that's being done at universities, usually through lobbying to government to support particular kinds of research, etc. And unfortunately, there is also institutional-led censorship. So if institutions do not like what somebody is saying, even if it is true, there are ways that they can censor them. I think research security, which is the new big thing, the big buzzword, it's certainly at the moment, at least, a strong talking point, and as I guess a focus of paranoia in many countries, and can also be used as a way of censoring or restricting academic freedom. The corporatization of universities, I guess anyone who works in a university knows that universities have become very much like businesses, and businesses need to run in a particular way. And if you're not towing the line, again, they can find ways of sanctioning you. But unfortunately, we also have a situation where the academic community can censor researchers and put them under pressure. And as a quote from the Academic Freedom Monitor, while no single threat appears overwhelming, their combined pressure creates a complex challenge to maintaining academic freedom with impacts on institutional governance, research funding, and international academic partnerships. So what I'd like to do is look in particular at the kind of, oh yeah, sorry, before we go any further, I was trying to find some sort of global map of where academic freedom is under pressure. I couldn't find one that I particularly wanted to use. So what I'm using here is a map of press freedom as a kind of a global proxy for academic freedom, because in countries where you find that there is no press freedom, or that it's very difficult to problematic, you would probably also find that there is a threat to academic freedom, and that universities and individuals are also being sanctioned. So unfortunately, you can see here there are areas of the world where there is very serious, so less than 40 points on the freedom of press scale, very serious restrictions. There's difficult restrictions in others, problematic. I mean, there's, here we go with the difficult, problematic. A fair chunk of Europe is in there, definitely the US, a lot of South America, and so on. And really, there are very few places on that map where you could say that there is complete freedom of the press and probably academic freedom. So let's look at research funding under pressure. Well, there is a huge amount of money, both public and private, being spent on research and development across the globe. In 20, so WIPO estimates that that is probably up around the 3 trillion mark globally, US dollars. That was in 2023. It is probably even higher now, but that comes with its own problems. Because it comes with expectations, and it comes with requirements. And often those are on emphasizing strategic research, challenge or mission-oriented research, and that puts huge pressure on funding agencies to actually do those kind of programs, at the risk of other, perhaps, less or mission-oriented programs. There's definitely a tangible, a requirement for a tangible impact from the research. So is it value for money? And I know from my time working in a funding agency, we used to have to prepare value for money cases if we wanted to run a new research program, which could be in public health or child mental health. And it's very hard to talk about value for money when you're talking about those kind of areas. So it was quite a difficulty for us. Public funding priorities can often be dictated by industry, because essentially industry wants the public to fund closer to market so that they don't have to. And I know that in a lot of prioritization exercises in Europe, government has invited industry in to I suppose, tell them what they need, because obviously everybody wants to create jobs and innovation, etc. And there is a belief that you have to listen to industry about this, which you do to a certain extent, but industry in turn have then trying to put pressure on the public funding system to fund more of the work that they should actually be funding. And the difficulty with this kind of very innovation, enterprise-oriented research is that it really undervalues the importance of fundamental research and humanities and social science research, which is, absolutely critical in the system. But the thing is that money shapes knowledge, and corporate ties risk biasing the outcomes. There are really inherent risks in that kind of control of funding, and especially if it's in the absence of robust research ethics and research integrity guidelines. A very good example, when the sugar industry case back in the 60s, it's been found that the sugar industry paid scientists to play down the link between sugar and heart disease and try and shift the blame over onto saturated fats as the culprit. And unfortunately, many of today's dietary recommendations may have been largely shaped by that pressure put on by the sugar industry. So look again at your food pyramid and ask yourself, could the sugar industry have had anything to do with this? There's also huge disparities in the systems. So for significant disparities in the availability and the timelines of new cancer drugs, for example, in poorer countries. There was a lower availability of COVID vaccines in sub-Saharan Africa. We all saw that. The thing is that pharmaceutical product development is not about the public good. It is about making money. It's about a need to get to market and to look at a profitable market and so on. And if you're in a country that cannot afford, well, then tough shit, really. And it's also about the distortion of science. So, Big Tobacco had a 50-year campaign to disrupt and delay research that showed that tobacco smoking was bad for you. And they did all sorts of sleight of hand to try and discredit that research. Climate sciences, scientists who question only human activity caused this narrative, which is the prevailing government narrative across the world. But, there are people saying, well, hold on, there may be other factors as well as this. But those scientists are really being silenced because there is a risk that, they're silencing themselves in some ways because there's a risk of losing funding, tenure, jobs, etc. So that is a way that science can be distorted. And also, there is currently a restriction on funding of research for particular groups. This is particularly in the US, and diversity, equality, inclusion, and women's health. So how have the funders responded to this? Well, they've responded by developing policies and process requirements for the research that they fund. And the policy objectives, in particular of research integrity and ethics, they formalize and institutionalize good research practices within the institutions, and they try to include or ensure ethical treatment of subjects, the environment, society, cultural heritage, and so on. So, that is good, because Daniel Finelli, who has written a lot in this area, would say that if you're looking at things that can really move the dial, having strong policies and frameworks is absolutely top of the list there. But the thing is, good research practice, they go beyond just methodological rigor and publications. I think that's what a lot of people think of when they think of good research practice. But it's also about setting standards of personal behavior towards students. So how do you mentor? How do you supervise? Do you do it respectfully? Do you do it well? Do you lead by example? But also of your colleagues. So are they getting fair recognition? Are they being included in papers or acknowledged for their work in papers? excuse me, rather than being ignored? Are you behaving fairly and equitably towards your colleagues? And for funders to mandate these policies in research integrity or to require them and research ethics, ultimately what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect the trustworthiness of the outputs of your research for your colleagues, for policymakers, and for the public. So even though you might say that these kind of mandates are actually reducing academic freedom, in this instance, it's in everybody's interest to actually have these. So it's a reasonable kind of curtailment, if you like. Institutions themselves, and I'm really interested to hear about this project, they're under huge pressure as well. 40% of UK universities are expecting to declare a financial deficit by the end of 2025. I mean, that is really terrible when you think about it. So they're under huge financial pressure. And, they have become increasingly reliant on non-government funding from industry, for example. And unfortunately, because of the financial situation they find themselves in, some of the funding that they accept may not necessarily align with their values or standards. And of course, international students are a really significant funding stream for universities, but the international students themselves are very picky. There's a lot of competition out there. So in order to attract them, universities have to compete in world rankings, which means which are generally quantitative in nature. So unfortunately, they are pushing their researchers then to have more citations, more publications, more funding, more everything. It's all about the numbers, which is a very dangerous place to be. And government funding then is often contingent on the core government funded on reaching certain KPIs and demonstrating impact. And again, that doesn't do much for humanities and social sciences research. Now, in the UK, they are trying to include more qualitative impact narratives in the ref, but generally speaking, I think there is just enormous financial pressures on universities that is really damaging academic integrity, because these kind of metrics can drive very poor behavior, and it really does compromise the integrity of staff who are under pressure to optimize for outputs, but not necessarily for truth. So what about the individual? There are a lot of pressures on individuals at the moment. First and foremost, there is often a lack of awareness and training about, for example, good research practices and, the responsibilities of academic freedom. And there also can be very poor role models. So, most people learn by example. If your supervisor, your mentor, other senior colleagues around you are behaving badly, well, that's not going to really teach you very much, is it? Unfortunately, if you're a more junior researcher, all the evidence would say that you probably feel the pressures on your career more, and therefore you're more vulnerable to poor behaviors and even misconduct. Cash incentives, they were never a good idea for academia at any point. There's huge publication pressure. So there's a pressure coming from the institutions, but then there is also a pressure coming laterally across colleagues, because you will not get funding, you may not get hired, you certainly won't get promoted if you're not publishing and publishing in high impact journals. Now, there is a huge effort to try and change that, but honestly, it's going to be a long, long road. And in the meanwhile, academics continue to be under huge publication pressure. It's a hyper competitive environment. We all know that. There's a very steep hierarchy. and it's very hard to make your way in the system unless you play the game. And unfortunately, this can also lead to very unequal power dynamics between junior researchers and more senior researchers in the system, which is extremely bad for research integrity and probably also for academic freedom. So unfortunately, many of these influences I've described arise from how researchers are currently assessed. And as I said, there are a lot of efforts now through the likes of COARA to change that. And I think it is something that the universities are starting to really see the benefit of. But of course, if everybody doesn't jump at the same time, it's very hard to change the system. What about individual responsibility then? Well, I think we've got to remember that the work that we do has a real impact in the world. So there's hardly a step that we take in the course of an ordinary day without relying on the judgment and virtue of anonymous experts. And, what have they done to deserve our trust? And when I say we are the public as well. We are the consumers of research. And this quote from Sheila Jassif. She has another interesting, I guess, perspective as well on this idea of trust. While scientific experts are relied upon as dependable advisors because of their specialized knowledge, impartiality, and straightforwardness, that view does not allow for the possibility of ignorance, uncertainty, error, cognitive bias, corruption, political interests, I would say financial interest, the list goes on, all of the kind of pressures that I've described. So academic freedom has to then mean also taking responsibility for being a researcher worthy of the trust of your colleagues, your collaborators, the participants in your research, and very importantly, the public. There are some really, I think, quite serious consequences of erosions of academic freedom. And the first is, as I mentioned, trust. There will be a decline in public trust if they fear that the outputs of that research arose with bias in them, or that it's disadvantaging certain groups, that it was done dishonesty, that conflicts of interest, for example, with industry, were ignored in the outputs because all of these outputs impact their lives. There's also a shrinkage if you curtail or erode academic freedom. So, this is certainly going to happen in the States, I think, where you're curtailing certain research, quite a lot of certain research that the system doesn't want to see. And that really narrows the knowledge output space, if you like. And people then will tend to self-censor and stick to safe topics because they want to keep their jobs. I think that lack of academic freedom can also create gaps, because if you're saying, no, you can't do research on women's health, you can't do research on trans, you can't do research on whatever, vaccine safety. It means that there's critical research being lost in those banned areas. That's going to impact on the health of those in particular who are seen as less deserving. So there will no longer be research done in those areas. So that, let's say, the health of women, of the trans population, of migrants, of the poor can really be damaged or fall into those research gaps. It also stifles creativity if you stifle academic freedom and innovation, and those things are critical because they feed from the wellspring of blue skies research. And if all of your research has to be innovative, have impact, have near-term outputs, etc., you're really disadvantaging and cutting off fundamental research. And that wellspring absolutely has to be maintained. And I know in Ireland they made that mistake, that they thought that, well, we don't really need any more basic research. Let's just do all sorts of applied research. And of course, within a few years, they ran into some significant problems because they weren't funding basic research anymore. And I think also with the fears around research security, it's going to really, I think, erode that most important thing in science, collaboration. Either we'll have fewer or more prescribed collaborations, or knowledge exchange, which will be curtailed in the face of things like research security fears. And I think that's going to be a huge loss to the academic community. So this is why research integrity matters. And if you're not familiar with research integrity, what it means is that is the behaviors of individuals or groups involved in conducting, in funding, in assessing, and the institutions that support research. So what it does, it influences the validity of the research or the truth of it and its trustworthiness. So it is doing the right thing when nobody is watching, picking that piece of paper up off the pavement, if you like, but in research terms. And code, there are lots of codes around the place, but I suppose one of the key codes for research integrity is the ELEA European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, in which I've been involved, and it sets out 4 principles of reliability in ensuring the quality of the research, honesty in developing and undertaking it, respect for colleagues, accountability for the research. And I think that these things really need to be preserved when we talk about the erosions of academic freedom. So there are some things we can do to sustain responsible academic freedom. We can make sure that we are as transparent and open as possible. I'm going to give you these slides, by the way, so I'm not going to read out. We can also make sure that we fight for university autonomy, but put in place strong governance in the universities. Have statements of academic freedom. And I think it's very important for universities to support less represented researchers, because the diversity is what gives flavor and context to research. But also universities need to protect researchers from abuse and harassment, either internal or external, for their views, for example, unless their views are actually criminal. I think it's really important, as Daniel Finelli said, to have strong research integrity and ethics frameworks and standards, but also to resource those, to make sure that they are adequately resourced for implementation and that people are trained. And we all need to take responsibility and be accountable for our research, for the researchers that we train and supervise. And God forbid something goes wrong, that institutions need to have fair processes in place to investigate misconduct. All of these constitute responsible academic freedom. So, and are very important because they defend freedom and integrity when universities and individuals come under attack, which unfortunately they are coming under attack at the moment. So just a few final thoughts. Truth, transparency, and trust are vital assets in our research system, and ensuring integrity in the data that we use and how we use it is really our strongest defense against those kind of distortions that I mentioned. The onus is really on us to strengthen frameworks, foster ethical leadership, champion openness, and academic freedom needs to be viewed more broadly. It needs to be viewed in the context of social benefit. So that means that we need, when we think about academic freedom, we need to think about the demands and the increased demands for accountability between universities and the state, and where social benefit comes into that equation, rather than simply, the university saying, yes, we'll do that research. Preserving academic freedom is really not optional. It's the foundation of democracy and progress, and I think it's something that we all need to fight very hard for. So I will leave you with the great Albert, and hopefully Stop sharing.